Canada's Online Streaming Act, or Bill C-11, is now one step closer to changing how you watch some of your favorite shows. Bill C-11 would require streaming services, including Netflix, Disney, and YouTube, to create and promote Canadian content. For more on how this affects you, we are joined by technology analyst Carmi Levy. He's in London, Ontario this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie.
All right, what is in this proposed bill, which is sort of a revision of Bill C-10, and why the government thinks this version is the way to go?
Well, you know, what's different here is that, first of all, the Broadcasting Act has been around since 1968, last updated in 1991, long before all of these digital tools became a thing. So it brings our kind of regulatory regime into the modern age, the digital age. And what Bill C-11 does really is it addresses a lot of the concerns that had sort of hobbled Bill C-10 previously proposed, largely around user-generated content. The original outcry was that, the stuff that you and I post to YouTube or to TikTok, or even if we upload a song to Spotify to share with our friends, that would be subject to government oversight, government regulation, and that was still left in. It's been pulled back a little bit as it's worked its way through the Senate, but it's still there. And so not everyone is happy about it, but certainly we're far ahead of where we were before, because at least now we have rules that apply to, modern times, not old times.
Well, and you and I are familiar with Canadian content rules, meaning a certain percentage of what you put out there has to be Canadian content, and there's specific rules around what qualifies as Canadian content. That's also an issue, because if it has, 3 or 4 things that are Canadian, then it is or it isn't. And that's a concern for the public, because they're not necessarily used to working in those rules. C-11 is now, the House of Commons have to decide whether this becomes a law. How would this change streaming services and the way we watch them?
It will make them a lot more accountable to Canadians. I mean, up until now, companies like Netflix and Amazon have come into Canada, done business here, but haven't really paid back into the cultural community. So Canadian productions haven't been getting funding from them because have been no rules that compel them to do so. So that's going to change, and that will mean more productions north of the border, more opportunities for Canadian cultural professionals, writers, musicians, producers, directors, all that, actors, to make money here. Closer to home, and we will see more Canadian content on these platforms, because not only will there have to be sort of, greater percentages of Canadian content, but it'll have to be more discoverable. So they'll have to make sure that you and I can find it on the web, on the apps, on the platforms where they're doing business. So basically, more Canadian content all the time, more opportunities for the Canadian cultural economy too.
So that's the bright side of it, but the controversial or the pushback side of it is, listen, there are streaming services that are it's like Canadians and taxes. The U.S. isn't used to paying the same amount of taxes we do, and they're not used to these restrictions on certain amounts being Canadian content. So what's the view from that side?
The risk is that the big American platforms will take their ball and go home, or maybe they won't invest as much as they need to, or they'll just do the bare minimum. And so we know that this has gone political. American, right up to the White House, they've complained that this could spark a trade war, that it's not it's dirty pool in terms of trade policy. And so companies like Netflix might say, you know what, maybe we don't want to make those investments in Canada. Maybe we'll just do what the rules tell us to, not anything more. We won't hire more people in our Canadian offices. We won't bring those deals to Canadian consumers. So there certainly is a risk there, but I think at the end of the day, there's a lot more money to be made for them from Canadian consumers, and I think in the end, they'll see the wisdom of this legislation.
I love the idea of having more access to more Canadian content and supporting the industry here. How would this affect creators on, services like YouTube?
Right now, see, that's the problem here, is that the legislation does say that they are now subject to this regulation. And so the government could, in theory, regulate what's called user-generated content, the stuff that you and I share on these platforms. Now, the federal government has said, we know that it's in there. We're not taking it out because we don't want the big companies to have a loophole to avoid complying with the law, but we're not going to enforce it. So it's in the letter of the law, but not the Don't worry, Canadian, that's okay. I don't sleep really well at night when I see that, because again, it's still encoded in law. It's still, the potential is still there. Maybe this government has no intention of acting on it, but maybe future governments will. And that certainly is a worry. And it looks like it's staying. It's gone through the House. It's gone through the Senate. Now it has to be approved, finally by the Senate later this month. And it's still there. And I think that still remains a worry for Canadians.
Well, the laws did need to be updated, but we'll see how they land with everybody if and when they go through. Carmi, thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Anne-Marie. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.